to good old 1970. Bell-bottoms were popular, the Beatles broke up, and Nissan got the band assembled to be able to create one of the most influential Japanese sports cars ever. And that sports car, of course, was the Fairlady Z, otherwise affectionately known as what we received here in the US, the Datsun 240Z. So Nissan's goal at the time was to create a two-seater, six-cylinder sports car that could affordably compete with European sports cars, which at the time were not really known for being all that reliable. And that was Nissan's spin. They wanted to make it reliable. They wanted to have a reliable sports car that you could drive every single day, and they had a couple goals in mind. They wanted to make sure that they elevated the brand's platform, using the Z to essentially bring Nissan's brand standing up, especially throughout the world. And that's exactly what they did. And interestingly enough, racing was a big part of it. And that's because the Z platform started to become known as one of the reliable sports cars that could be used in a lot of different forms of racing. Interesting that the car was able to really take on this everyday man sort of status. And that's exactly what the Z did. It was able to establish itself as a really reliable, affordable performance sports car that not only had handling characteristics, but also could accept mods easily. And when we start talking about mods, that's where wheels really start to play a part, because it is arguably one of the most impactful visual things that you could do to any one of the Generation Zs to make it stand out from the rest. Now, from 1970 onward, we have established 7 different generations of the Z platform. And today we're only going to be talking about one of them, but today we're going to tell you exactly what wheels fit the Z33 350Z platform. So let's get into it. Welcome to Fit Check. Okay, before we get started, let's throw a little bit of a disclaimer in here. For those of you that are out there, you have a 370Z. I know we're talking about the Z33 and you have a Z34, and yes, they are similar wheel fitments, but they're not the same. So because of that reason, we're going to cover the Z34 in a different episode. So if you have a 370Z, don't worry, we're coming for you, but just not in this episode. So when it comes down to wheel fitment options for the 2003 to 2008 350Z, the body is really pretty much the same. It doesn't matter if you have a Nismo version or if you have a track version or even one of the base versions. The body is pretty much standard. So when we come down to thinking about wheel selection, we don't really have to think about these different models from that perspective, but the trim packages actually make a big difference when we start talking about the brakes. Okay, so there are 7 different types of trim packages that would have potentially come with the 350Z. With that, we need to be able to focus on which ones actually have the Brembo options. That's gonna be our biggest kind of issue that we will have with considering wheel fitment. Okay, so let's talk about what would have potentially come on your car or what you could potentially have on your car now, even if you bought the car used. So let's talk about what this platform was. It was a bolt pattern of 5 on 114.3, and the hub size would be a 66.1 millimeter hub size. Now, the reason you need to know that is because if you would have aftermarket wheels, you need to be able to purchase a hub-centric ring that will go from the size of the center bore of the wheel to the 66.10. Going back to some of the base trim packages, some of the early model years, you would have seen the car come with 17-inch wheels. They would have been staggered, would have been 17.7.5 in the front, around a 30 offset, and a 17.8 in the rear, again around a 30. Again, in some of the other packages in the later years, you might have had an 18 or 19-inch staggered package on the car. So you might have an 18.8 in the front, an 18.8.5 in the rear, or an 18/9 in the front and a 19/10 in the rear. So we'll kind of get into how you utilize those tires, but at the end of the day, we're going to be more concerned about the width and the offset as we go forward. All right, so if you've watched Fit Check before, you know that we kind of put this thing in 3 different classifications. Right now, we're going to be talking about 3 different fitments. Today, we're going to be looking at no hassle, slight flex, all the wheel. But let's start with the no hassle option and talk about if you want to keep your stock tires or stock tire size and you just want to upgrade the wheels. All right, so let's start with our first category, the no hassle fitment. No hassle fitment is basically going to be the category where you're going to keep your stock size tire. All you're going to be doing is upgrading your wheels within those tires. So most of these tires and most of these wheels that you're going to select, you're gonna be able to choose a wheel that's within 7.5 inches wide in the front to 8.5 inches wide in the front. And you're gonna be able to kind of go into the low 30s as far as an offset. And that really won't affect you one way or another. Now let's talk about the rear of the car. In the rear of the car, you're gonna be able to pick a wheel that's really anywhere from 8 to 8.5 inches, and it's really not gonna be a problem. You can go, again, way into the low 30s on offset, and you're not gonna have any issues at all. You're gonna bolt these things on into your wheels and tires, and as long as the approved rim width and the tire company all matches up, you're gonna be in good shape. So now when it comes to the No Hassle Fitments, the one thing that we need to talk about is the brake options. Again, like I said before, there's different trim levels that will actually come with the Brembo option. If you have a Brembo brake on your car, just make sure that you don't downsize. It's really important that you at least have the same diameter that your car came with, because you gotta clear those brakes. Now, the other thing I'm gonna say is when you choose a wheel, make sure that you're telling the wheel and tire professional or whoever you're buying your wheels from that you have a Brembo brake option, and just allow them to make sure that it does clear the wheel option that you have. So just make sure that you mention this to your wheel and tire professional. Now, if I have to make one sort of suggestion here, I would say within the approved rim width of the tire, I know I keep repeating that, but it's super important because there's so many different tire manufacturers that have suggestions. The car takes a lot of wheel. You'll see as we kind of go through the rest of these fitment categories. So if you don't want your car to look like it wants to fall over, try to get the wheels out there. It will really make the car look tougher. And again, you're not really changing anything as far as your tire fitment or anything like that. You're not gonna have any rubbing issues if you're using the right overall rolling diameter tire. So this should be good. That's my suggestion. Hope it helps. Okay, so our next category is the slight flex category. Now, a slight flex here is where you're gonna be changing your wheels and your tires, and you're gonna be trying to kind of get something that will bolt onto the car without any issues. You're not gonna have any rubbing issues, you're not gonna have any scrub radius issues, you're not gonna have anything where you're gonna have to worry about what you have to do or modify this car to put your wheel and tire package on. You really can do anything from 9 inches wide to 9.5 inches wide, and you can do anything from the area of about 35 all the way down to 25 millimeters in offset. So you have a lot of range here to put on and still not have to worry about rolling fenders or doing any modifications on the front end of your car. In the rear, you're gonna be able to run more width. Again, the car would have come staggered from the factory, and we can keep that staggering alive here as well. This is a slight flex option. We're looking to fill out the wheel wells, but we're not looking to do any modifications. And to do that, we're gonna be able to put anything from a 9 around an ET35 on the car, all the way to a 10 and around ET25. You can see there's a lot of room there. So you can really push things out. You're gonna wanna make sure that you have the correct diameter to clear that brake. And then in addition to that, you're gonna wanna make sure that you have enough caliper protrusion room within the wheel you choose. Some wheels just don't have it. So if you go lower in the offset range and you go wider in the wheel range, you'll tend to have really no problem clearing the brakes, but you're gonna wanna mention it to your wheel and tire professional so you don't get stuck. Now, if I'm gonna make one suggestion for the slight flex category, I would say, again, let's maximize our wheel choice here. I would say at least do a 9-inch wide in the front, try to be around ET25. That's really gonna give you a good fill out of that wheel well, but it's not gonna cause any issues. Then in the rear, let's do something like 10 around ET25. You're gonna be able to put a really good squared up tire on both the front and the rear. It's gonna fill out the wheel wells pretty well, and it's not gonna cause you any issues that you have to worry about. So that is a great thing. This car is so easy to put wheels on, and you're gonna love how quickly your car actually takes shape and the appearance gets so much tougher. Okay, so we're jumping into our third category of fitment here, and that is all the wheel. Now, this is basically the category that comes with a slight disclaimer. The reason is because we're gonna be giving you fitments that are all the wheel you can bolt onto your car, and for the most part, you shouldn't have any issues, but it's gonna occupy the most amount of wheel within the wheel well. If you over tire the car, if you put something on that's just a little bit too big, bulky, the wrong size tire, maybe it's too tall, maybe it's too wide, and you don't have your fenders or your quarters rolled already, you potentially could experience some rubbing issues, and I don't want that for you. So pay attention to these to these widths and these offsets, and also keep in mind that your tire size will become important. Really work with a wheel and tire professional if you're not really sure, or hit up the internet. There's a lot of information there. All right, so with that disclaimer, let's talk about the front and rear of this car. On the front of this car, the All the Wheel type fitment is basically gonna be about a 9.5-inch wide, around ET25. That's kind of all the wheel. The next, let's talk about the rear. About a 10.5 ET25 to ET20 is really where all the wheel is going to sit. Now again, these are tremendously focused on a few different things, and once we get into the all the wheel category, we are susceptible to some modifications that you have made or have not made to your vehicle. Example, if your car's really low, if you're using a really aggressive tire, something that's really bulky, these things could all cause a slight rubbing issue. So I recommend that you work with a wheel and tire professional to make sure that you're choosing the right size tire for your particular application. On my 350Z, I have run a whole bunch of different wheels. And right now, my sweet spot is usually 9.5 ET25, and in the rear, I usually run about a 10.5 and around a 25, and that allows me to run a really bulky tire on there. So I'm not suggesting this, but I run a 305 in the rear, and I run a 275 in the front. So you can get away with this, especially if you have everything dialed in. I have adjustable suspension, I have some things, but I promise you, this car is squared up and puts all the contact patch down to the ground. So you can achieve this without too much issue, but you do have to make sure that you're kind of playing the needle and doing everything correctly. So again, all the wheel is certainly possible in these cars, and you can have a lot of fun, and I think you should. Okay, I promised you the bonus category, and we call it yo-yo. It stands for you're on your own. And basically what this means is, this is the place where I get to address all the people that are probably trolling me in the comments right now, telling me that what I just said was too conservative. I understand that your boy probably runs a 10.5-inch square on his 350Z. I understand that maybe somebody else runs 11s to 11.5-inch in the rear on their 350Z. What I'm telling you is that once you depart from the front being a 9.5-inch wide around an ET25, and once you depart from the rear being around a 10 to 10.5-inch ET25, you are now going into the territory of having to roll quarters, roll fenders, make sure that you're using the right size tire, possible suspension setting changes, and on top of that, depending on how you have your car set up, you could find yourself in some rubbing issues. I'm acknowledging that people do this. I'm just telling you that this is the part where you're on your own. Remember that your wheel and tire width can actually affect the handling characteristics of the car. You'll see a lot of racers, especially when they go to the track with a 350Z, they will do a squared fitment. And yes, that's because of tire management and it's easier to have squared tires all the way around, but it's also because it helps reduce some of the oversteer within the setup. For example, if you go wider in the front and you're able to kind of keep that same width in the back, kind of remove the stagger, you can tame the car down a little bit, especially if you're experiencing a lot of oversteer. Now, there's a lot of different things you can do if you use that same sentiment and by changing kind of how the stagger goes or what your wheel fit is. The reason I'm only saying it is because sometimes people make wheel selections based off of what they see on the internet from a look standpoint and don't really understand that it could potentially change the way their car handles. So I'm just throwing that in there. Just keep it in mind, do some research, make sure you're getting the right wheel and tire package for yourself. All right, so before we get out of here, one little special consideration. Just keep in mind that with anything we've said here today, you should always work with a wheel and tire professional, and the reason is because depending on how your car has been kind of aligned, or the suspension you have in your car, or any modifications you've made, or using the wrong size tire, all these things could affect the experience that you get, and we just want to make sure that you're doing it correctly. So again, work with a wheel and tire professional to make sure that you're getting the right wheel and tire selection for your vehicle. Even though this information is pretty good, we just want to make sure that you're going to have a flawless experience. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for joining us on this fit check. Stay tuned for the Z34 fitment that we will do later on, where we'll cover the 370Z, and we'll catch you on the next one.